This is lecture 1 in our series English Thought and Culture by J. Corgan. If you remember, in our introduction we talked about some of the importance of the English language, and today we're going to go back to a very famous period and very important period in the development of especially English literature and modern England, the 16th century. The 16th century is from 1500 to 1599. And we're going to look at one of the most important figures in English literature, a person with a very famous name, William Shakespeare. Now, you might have heard of William Shakespeare. He is a very, very famous man. As a child in school, I had to read a lot of the plays of William Shakespeare. Today we're going to look at one of his very famous poems, and together I hope to help you to understand and enjoy this great writer. Maybe I am biased because I am English, but William Shakespeare, I would say, is the greatest writer in the English language. And because you say the English language is one of the most popular languages in the world, maybe you could say he is the greatest writer of all time. But that is just my opinion. Okay, remember me, my name is J. Corgan. And before we start this lecture, here are the major points to consider pre-lecture. First, Shakespeare was born in the Elizabethan period, when England was rising as a world power. And when I say the Elizabethan period, what do I mean? Queen Elizabeth was a daughter of King Henry VIII, and she ruled from 1558 to 1603, so a rule of 45 years. She was a very strong woman. She never married, and for that reason she was called the Virgin Queen. She was very good at bringing different sides together, and her rule was a time of peace and stability, stability for England. It was a time when England was rising as a world power. In her time, there was the first attempt by England to colonize, to create an empire in America. And Sir Walter Raleigh, a very famous ship sailor, founded the colony of Virginia. You hear about the state of Virginia now in America, but he started the colony of Virginia, named after the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. So England was rising as a world power. At that time, there was a lot of conflict between England and the other major power in Europe, and indeed the world, Spain. Now, there were big differences, cultural differences, but more importantly, religious differences between Spain and England. And so this was a big fight between superpowers. But in 1588, the English defeated the Spanish Armada, the Spanish fleet of ships that was sent to invade England, and this was a great thing for English pride and English rising, England's rise as a world power. The Elizabethan age, Elizabethan era as this is called, was also a golden age of literature, especially plays, the writing of plays and the performing of plays for the general public. And many great playwrights such as Ben Jonson, Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare were around this time. This was a golden age. This was the start of England rising as a world power, a time of peace, a time of prosperity. Now, another thing we need to consider about Shakespeare is in the 16th century, people didn't speak English like I'm speaking it now. It was a different English. But with a little help, we can understand this English. And the third thing we need to see, as I've said, William Shakespeare is seen as the greatest writer in the English language. Okay, so who was William Shakespeare? Who was William Shakespeare? Now, the interesting thing about William Shakespeare is we don't know a lot about him. He was born in a town called Stratford upon Avon. Now, Stratford upon Avon is a small town right in the middle of a county called Warwickshire, which is right in the middle of England. So Shakespeare was as English as England. You know, he came right from the centre of Middle England, and his town, Stratford upon Avon, is you can go there now. It's a very lovely town with a lot of traditional houses. You can go to Shakespeare's birthplace, the church that he went to, the church he was baptised in. You can go to the museum of Shakespeare. You can really go there and imagine England of the 16th century. It's a wonderful place. But the interesting thing also about Shakespeare is that he was not someone from the upper classes. He was not from a rich background, like many other writers of the time. He was his mother and father were humble, poor people, and he had to get richer people to help him in his career. We don't know that much about him. We know that he went to London and he was an actor at the end of the 16th century. And while he was making money through acting, he wrote plays. Now, he performed a lot of these plays in a place called the Globe Theatre, which is on the south bank of the River Thames in London. Now, recently, in the last 10 years, a company has rebuilt the Globe Theatre as it would have been in the time of Shakespeare. And I recommend, if you're ever in London, to go and see a play at the Globe Theatre. Myself and my wife went there last summer, and it was amazing. Now, when we think about plays, we think of something that very few people go to. But you have to imagine that plays in the 16th century were like films today. you know, in the globe you have seats for very rich people. You have seats for people with middle money. But you also have just the place at the bottom for the poor people. So these plays were not just something that the very, very intelligent people went to. These were plays that lots of people went to. So the thought, the thinking of these playwrights, the people who wrote the plays, influenced the people and influenced society. And Shakespeare talked a lot about important things in British political life, historical life, and religious life. Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about the era of Elizabeth, the Elizabethan era, and we've talked about William Shakespeare the man. Now, we're going to actually look at one of his poems. Now, okay, just before we do that, we'll look at this slide. We've looked at the rise of Europe and the beginnings of Britain's overseas influence. We see that not only did Walter Raleigh go and found Virginia, not only were the Spanish beaten by the British Navy, but also Sir Francis Drake was the first man to go around the world, to send a ship all the way around the world. This was in the Elizabethan era, and this would have influenced the thought of Shakespeare. You could say he is the greatest writer in the most influential language in the world. And we're going to look at one of his sonnets, because he wrote many plays which are, the language of the plays, it may be a little bit difficult. My hope is that you in the future, after reading this sonnet and maybe developing in your English language skills, will one day read some of the plays of Shakespeare, because they are the height of English literature, and they're very, very wonderful. Okay, we're going to look at a famous sonnet, Sonnet 18. The theme of love, which a lot of poems are about, and the beauty of Middle England. Now, the idea of the beauty of England, the beauty of Great Britain, is a very powerful image in English literature. I have travelled across most of the world, but I must say England in April or May, or even in autumn, in summer, and summer and autumn, is for me the most beautiful place in the world. Maybe again that's just my opinion, but this is something that's really shaped a lot of English literature. A belief that we have been given a very special land, a very beautiful land. And we're going to look at that in this poem. Okay, now, what is a sonnet? When we talk about a sonnet, when we talk Sonnet 18, a sonnet is a particular type of poem, usually 14 lines. A Shakespearean sonnet has 14 lines, and it has a special rhyming system. When you talk about rhyme, we say, it says, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" This rhymes with "rough winds do shake the darling buds of May." So day and May rhyme. So a sonnet has a particular rhyming structure that we will talk about later in the lecture. Okay, but let's read the poem. Shall I compare Oh, I'll start again, sorry. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease has all too short a date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his golden complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Okay, that is Sonnet 18. You can see all of it there. Now, this is a very, very beautiful poem. And I want, in this next 10 minutes, to help you see the beauty in this poem. Okay, let's have a look. Let's put it in green. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare thee? So thee means just you. Thee is an old way of saying you. Shall I compare you to a summer's day? Now remember, maybe a summer's day in Al-Hassa or a summer's day in Saudi Arabia is not a wonderful thing. Maybe you want to be inside, you want to get away from it. But a summer's day in England is the most wonderful thing that we can imagine. In England, our weather, we don't have much sun, so when we have a summer's day, it is it is a wonderful thing. So he's comparing his love, his friend, his wife, whoever it is, to a summer's day, to a thing that is glorious, to a thing that is wonderful, you know? And this is called a metaphor. A metaphor where you are comparing one thing with another. You know, you're using an image to say you are like something else. And this is what happens in poetry. Thou, again, thou means you. Thou art. Art, again, are. You are. Thou art is an old way, a traditional way, a polite way of saying you are. Thou art. More lovely and more temperate. More temperate. Temperate, how can I say temperate? Temperate is like controlled, nice, ordered. Everything that England is. Everything that an English summer's day is. Not too hot, not too cold. Just perfect. You know? So he's saying you are more lovely and you are more perfect than a summer's day. Okay? Wonderful. But rough winds, strong winds do shake the darling buds of May. And as I said, England is beautiful in May. In March, April, the spring slowly comes. And in May, all the buds, all the flowers, all the trees burst into life. You know, maybe you don't like poetry, but I say if you go to England in May and stay in the country, you'll want to write poetry. So, but it's saying that rough winds shake these beautiful flowers. And summer's lease hath, that just means has, and summer's lease has all too short a date. So sometimes you make lease a building, you hire a building, or you hire a car, and then your lease is finished. So summer finishes. This is what it's saying. You know, winds will destroy the beautiful flowers of May. And you know this in Saudi Arabia, sometimes too hot, the eye of heaven shines. So sometimes the sun is too hot and the beautiful grass and the beautiful flowers get dry. You know, in Saudi Arabia, this happens. So this, when it talks about the eye of heaven, the sun, this is an example of imagery. Okay. And often is his gold complexion dimmed. Complexion is your face. I have a light complexion. You know, maybe someone will have a red complexion. But this is the sun. His gold complexion, his gold face is dimmed. Maybe it's misty, you know. And every fair from fair sometimes declines. Every fair from fair. So decline means to go down. Fair is beautiful. So every beautiful thing from its beauty goes down. Every fair from fair sometimes declines. So there might be a beautiful person or a beautiful scene in nature, a beautiful car, but it will lose its beauty. That is the way of life. So it loses its beauty by chance, maybe an accident, or nature's changing course. Just people get old, things get old. Nature's changing course, untrimmed. So you cannot hold it down. It's untrimmed. You see it? Dimmed, untrimmed. But thy, another word for you, thy or your, is actually a word for your. Your eternal summer shall not fade. If you're talking to your wife, you know that your wife's beauty will one day fade, but he's saying your eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair, of that beauty that you owest. This is that you own, that is yours. Nor, this is neither, shall death brag. Oh, you know, brag is to speak with confidence. You wanderest, you walk in his shade. So it's saying that you're not going to die, because death is never going to be able to brag that you walk in its shade. He's never going to be able to do that. So how can this be that this person will never die, that they'll always keep their beauty? Here we read about this in the next line. So when in eternal lines to time thou growest, which means you grow. So in eternal lines. What are these eternal lines? It is the poem. That the poem, through the poem, he's saying that the beauty of his friend, his wife, whoever he's talking to, will stay forever because William Shakespeare has written a poem about him. And this is an important idea in English literature, but maybe in all literature, that through the written word, people become immortal. They can live forever. We know about a man 500 years ago because people wrote about him. So this is an important theme. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Again, to you. So he's saying, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so as long as there is mankind, there is humanity, so long lives this poem, and this gives life to you, gives life to thee. So this poem is going to cause this person that William Shakespeare is writing the poem about to live forever in men's minds. Okay. So we've looked at the meaning of the poem. Let's look at a bit at the rhythm and rhyme of the poem. Oh. Oh. Now, we're going to look at the structure of the Shakespearean sonnet. So what lines rhyme with other lines? Now this is always an important thing to do when you look at a poem. What lines rhyme? So here, this line rhymes with this line. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. Here, thou art lovely and more temperate, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. So these rhyme here. Okay. Now, sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and every fair from fair sometimes declines. And often is his gold complexion dimmed by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. So, here we have a very simple rhyming structure. Line 1 with 3, 2 with 4, 5 with 7, 6 with 8. And this is a classic sonnet rhyme structure. Okay, let's look at the next one. Okay, let's see now. So E, again, simple rhyme structure. E, but thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shades, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So it's very simple, the odd lines and then the even lines, they have a rhyme structure. And that's 12 lines are like that in a Shakespearean sonnet. The last 2 lines then rhyme. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So that's the final rhyming couplet. Okay, so here in this poem we have the meaning, we have some of the rhyme, the rhythm. Now let's just lastly look at some of these metaphors and imagery. So a metaphor is when you're comparing one thing with something else. You know, you're not saying this person is a summer's day. You're saying they're like a summer's day. You don't have to use the word like, but that's what they're doing. It's a metaphor. This is a metaphor. Now, if you look at these first 5 or 6 lines, what is the imagery? What pictures is the... What pictures is the poet painting? We talk about a painter paints pictures, but the poet is, with his words, trying to create an image in your mind. And this is all an image of summer and nature. You know, summer's day, darling buds of May, rough winds, summer's lease, too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often his gold complexion, this is the look of his face, is dimmed. So this, the poet is creating in your mind the idea of an English summer's day, and this is called imagery. So later on I'm going to ask you questions after the second lecture about what imagery are the poets using. So these are some of the imagery that they're using. Okay, well this is the Sonnet 18, and this is just a little taste of the writing of William Shakespeare. It's a taste of the writer, his writing, and the age he lived in. I hope this will help you to start slowly to read the works of William Shakespeare and find joy in the works of William Shakespeare. Thank you, and this is the end of today's lecture.